Hello, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be with you today and part of the education session by the World Federation of Hemophilia. And today we're going to talk about the clinical trials. My name is Johnny Mahlangu. In brief, I'm going to talk about what is the process being followed to bring treatment to the public. What are the reasons for conducting clinical trials? What are the phases of treatment development in the clinical trials? And what are the critical components of clinical trial conduct? Just to remind you that the process of bringing treatment to be used ultimately by all of us has not changed in many decades, not even in the context of COVID-19. In a very brief fashion, the process follows 3 steps. There is a preclinical phase, there is a clinical phase, and then there is a regulatory authority phase. In the preclinical phase, this is the phase at which the drug is discovered, and in fact, its effect on the particular disease is being evaluated. And this is called proof of concept. This has obviously elements of deep scientific inquiry. And in fact, if that proof of concept is established, the drug then moves on from being tested in animals to being tested in humans in the clinical trials. In the clinical trials per se, which involve humans, we establish the safety and the efficacy of the drug that is being developed. We also establish the dose of the drug as well as the quality of the treatment that is being developed. The clinical trial is an important component, and I'll speak to the various phases later. This is usually followed by a report that contains the data that is evaluated by the regulatory authorities such as the FDA and MIA and many others around the world. And their job is to evaluate the safety and efficacy and quality of the data that has been generated in the clinical trial, and to make a call as to whether the drug can actually be released and be licensed for use by the general public. If one looks at the importance of the clinical trials are actually the research tools that we use to advance knowledge and of course to optimize patient care. Without the clinical trials, one will probably find it hard to be able to advance the knowledge that we have with regard to diseases and their treatment, and of course to make sure that the patients get the benefit. Perhaps more importantly, clinical trials are conducted in humans in order to establish if the treatment that is being developed works or does not work in human. And perhaps more importantly, this does not happen as a once-off process. It takes a number of phases. The phases of the clinical trial can be summarized into these 3 cartoons, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. In phase 1, we are interested in the safety of the treatment being developed. So a limited number of individuals are exposed to the treatment. And of course, at that stage, we are looking for the most optimally efficacious and safe molecule that would be used in the subsequent phases. In phase 2 of the clinical development, which is usually conducted in humans, and as well as those individuals with the disease of interest, such as hemophilia, we expand the number of individuals that are exposed to the treatment that is being developed, in addition to obviously narrowing down the molecules that may well be of use in the development. And in phase 3, we significantly expand the number of individuals. We are looking specifically not only for safety, we're also looking for efficacy of the treatment, but more importantly, now we've got a very limited number of molecules that may well work in those individuals. So these are, of course, the 3 phases of development. We do know that, in fact, There are other phases that are important, such as the phase 4 that we'll talk about later. And talking about the phase 4, it is very, very important that one emphasizes the importance of registries and other ancillary tools that we have in the gathering of additional data. What I also want to emphasize perhaps is the interlink between the various role players who are responsible for the successful conduct of clinical trials. Most importantly is the participants or the patients that participate in clinical trials. What we do all the time, we evaluate the risk-benefit ratio such that the patients benefit out of the clinical trial. In the context of many parts of the world, we also ensure that the patients have got access to the treatment beyond the clinical trial. And of course, clinical trials have to have an element of social value and other components that we look for that justify why we do clinical trials in patients. The second important component is the role of the investigators. Amongst other things, we ensure that they have the relevant education, they have the relevant expertise, the site capacity to be able to conduct the clinical trial according to the protocol, and of course they comply with all of what is required. The sponsors do not escape these accountabilities and responsibilities. They need to demonstrate a track record and compliance with the regulatory authorities. And more importantly, they need to generate reports, which reports will then on a regular basis throughout the clinical trials get presented to both the ethics committees as well as the health protection authorities, whose role is to review this data and to establish if in fact the clinical trial was conducted according to the protocols that they've already reviewed, and if not, to enforce that such conduct in fact is according to what they've approved. Perhaps more importantly, one needs to bear in mind that clinical trials often are conducted in settings where there is experience. It is important that if you're interested in participating in a clinical trial, that you contact your nearest healthcare provider or center to be able to guide it where the clinical trials are actually conducted, so that you can participate and contribute to the evolution of the treatment, which we're all excited about. That is all I had for you. Thank you very much for your attention.